Welcome back. Our first conversation, as we mentioned prior to the commercial break, is with the Leadership Intervention Unit, and of course, its role in dialoguing with various groups within the Belizean society, Belize City in this case. We have with us this morning the chair of the Leadership Intervention Unit, William Dawson. Good morning.
Good morning.
We also have the treasurer of the Port AVP Innovators, Coretta Apolonio.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. And of course, we also have Raymond Gongora. We all know him as Footy Gongora. He is the director of the Lakei Transformers. Good morning, folks.
Good morning. Good morning.
Let's begin first of all, William, by getting a synopsis of where we are. At present, we know that there was a spike in crime and violence in the Lake Independence community, where currently there's a state of emergency. And while that is not within the ambit of the LIU, you guys are responsible for bridging the gap, for bringing both parties to the table to see how you could perhaps broker some kind of a agreement or a peace treaty, so to speak. Let's begin there.
Okay, yeah, you're right. There was a recent spate. We've seen quite a calm. I think the longest length of calm, right, in quite a few months between those two groups. And unfortunately, some idle fella or fellas, acted outside of their group's responsibility in terms of keeping the peace and fired some shots, and that eventually started a domino effect. And state of emergency was called. But that is not to overshadow that, we have been in talks with these guys. In fact, when the murder of Darren Banks happened, we were on the ground with those guys, and we managed to really diffuse a lot of tension that was building between them. And the guys were willing to come back to the table, and that is the key. If you go and look at the records where these feuds are concerned, there's multiple murders that happen in a very short space of time. And so that is the essence of the dialogue, so that we can open the floor for reasoning and for them to get an opportunity to vent. And primarily we have seen that there's a decrease in retaliation when that occurs.
I want to get to the bottom of a few things, just to really lay out the foundation, right? So, in your experience, what is it that is the cause, more or less, of the feuds? And once you get down to the bottom of that, how do you then open that dialogue? How does that conversation even look like?
It's a very sensitive thing to approach, because a lot of these guys are hurting. Most of the time, like in this instance, even the persons who were struck upon are wondering, like, why?
Yeah.
Why? They were celebrating after a football match, and somebody probably intoxicated or just passed by, not liking the fact that they saw these guys, socializing in peace. And that's the thing that we have to fight. These young men who are running around rogue, seem as if though they don't have any control over them, and we keep on telling the so-called leaders of this group that you are responsible for your group's behavior. Oftentimes we can't tell this one, we can't tell that one. Then that is why we are telling these leaders, you will face the brunt of the law, because at the end of the day, if you are in a circle and you are the leader of that circle and you can't control those in your circle, then you ultimately must face the responsibility. And the law must come down and do its part. Although we have the intervention and the mediation for those rogue individuals, we're hoping, as always, that the law really surgically approaches, and the law must know who's the ones giving the trouble, and approach them and deal with them accordingly.
How is it that we are still in this dialogue per se? Because I understand it's an intervention unit, right? So what then happens once you start to communicate open dialogue? How do you begin that intervention process? Because from my understanding, a gang is a sense of family space, right? You are there because you want to feel belonged, you want to feel loved, you're part of that you're protected in that space. So how do you then begin to open that conversation about, you know what, you don't need this type of space to feel loved, to be in a family, to be protected?
Well, you know, very importantly, it's about fighting the cultural dynamics, especially as males living in Belize and Belize City, growing up with that level of masculinity and that ego. And oftentimes we see where these young men are not afforded the space to vent and to reason like men should do, and be able to express their emotions, and these are things we take for granted. You would have to be on the ground and in tune with what's happening to know how important it is, because a lot of these guys do have family that they love, but the ego that they were taught to express overshadows that. And so the dialogue simply begins with bringing back to reality what it is or who they love. And so once that dialogue begins, it gives them that moment to reflect that they're not afforded in the group. The group is only for them to express the ego, not to express the love and the respect for each other and their families.
William, one other question before we segue into the other parts of the discussion. When you sit down with these individuals, you bring them together, I think one of the first questions asked is, okay, what is the issue? What causes this kind of a flare-up? In this case, you've mentioned that there was an attack on a group of young men who were celebrating after a football game.
Right.
So we know that that is the action that triggered it. But what led to the perpetrator of that incident deciding that, you know what, we'll target these group of young men? When you have that conversation with them, what are you getting?
Well, as usual, it's crazy because there's nothing tangible and reasonable for these young men to behave this way. This whole turf territory thing, it's overrated in terms of this whole gang anomaly, and we've always said, and they themselves admitted that, you know, Belize City or Belize doesn't really have gangs or organized groups. These groups are not organized, they're very haphazard in their approach in terms of this feud, and at the end of the day, it's not like they're getting anything out of these wards. They're going to prison, most of them with nothing in their bank accounts, with leaving their families out here to fend for themselves. And so these old feuds, and definitely we have to look at a therapeutic approach in terms of the psychological state and mind of these young men, because a lot of them are hurt individuals, and hurt people hurt people. And so that's the first thing you have to understand. Many of them, their fathers were killed, their brothers were killed, and so they're walking around with that chip on their shoulder, waiting for the first opportunity. And we tend to highlight just the feuds among the young men. There's a lot of young women as well walking around with the same type of energy, and if you notice on social media, there's so many fights between them. So everybody, especially post-pandemic, heated and frustrated and looking at the first opportunity to express their anger, and that's just how I see it. It's just that some of these boys have guns and they're using it, and we're seeing these flare up.
So now my question to either Coretta or Raymond, how do we begin to break the cycle? And what are some of the initiatives that we're putting in place to see how we could get these at-risk youths into something more meaningful? I asked that question, but in the back of my mind, and I'm being as honest as I possibly can with myself and with you guys, over the years, we've seen a lot that has been done. And it's very difficult to get a hold of the minds of young people and keep their attention in the right place. How do you guys now set out to make a difference in this particular situation?
Okay, so Mr. Dawson said a lot. And one thing that stands out the most to me is, you know, family. These guys are hurt. They're conditioned to be macho, to suppress, and then you suppress until you explode. And so our take, or my take, the take of my group and my community, our scope is to reach them at that tender age where you're still at sponge, where you're still sucking information. You know, our focus is the kids between 8 to 17, where you're still in that learning scope. So you can still be taught to express your anger in a positive way. You know, you could talk about, I didn't like that you offended me or you hurt me, rather than you suppress that energy, and then when you get a gun or a knife or whatever, you feel like violence is the way for you to express it. And so one of the tasks of the Port Innovators or AVP group is to create functions or to do activities to build relationships, so that I could be familiar with you, that at the end of the day, if you come across and you offend me, you hurt me, or you say something to me, there's already that foundation of a friendship to some degree, that I would be able to speak to you
Properly communicate.
You know. So we are big on planning activities to pull everybody together. Port Loyola group consists of 3 sections. It's the Reggae Street, Caesar Ridge area, it's the Jane Osha, and it's the Penn Road and Farbers Road to some degree area. And so when we do these activities, we're pulling the kids from all of these areas in a common ground, so that you could start to familiarize yourself, make friends. You don't just have to know, oh, that person live over there, he live over there. No, interact, start to build these relationships, to lessen that tension, so that when you're at adult stage, you know,
no longer segregated based
exactly.
on,
It's unified, and we can be able to sit as a community, as a group, as a family, as friends, as companions, as whatever, to be able to talk. I think how we lost our way was people became, I would say, selfish or shut down in some sense. And then because you're shut down and because you're taught to suppress, you know, all of these things are factored in, and then, okay, I'm upset, I don't know nothing else to do but explode.
How do you navigate a situation where, for instance, in one community, a large community such as Port Loyola, where you have perhaps feuding groups, but you're taking these at-risk young men and women and placing them in an environment where you're trying to foster a sense of community. But you do have other influencers who are fighting against that.
Right.
Because if, for instance, you come from Reggae Street, and Reggae Street that has its own group, and that group has a boss, then you have another area, same thing. These kids have to go back to that neighborhood, right?
Right.
To their own little pocket. And so these influencers are saying, well, okay, so what do you go on there? And so you're constantly, in my opinion, having to fight against that.
It's a start over every day, sometimes 3-4 times for the day. Because rightfully that you said, you know, we're fighting inside to fight outside, and sometimes the fight is bigger. We're not aware of the bigger fight, you know, but it's to empower these kids as much. You mentioned about being in a gang. Your recollection of being in a gang is the same as mine. When I was younger and you said that you're in a gang, maybe your daddy had died and the older guys in the neighborhood make sure you go to school, make sure you listen to your mom, you know, so on and so forth. It's not that way anymore. You know, it's about street, your ego and your street name and your street title. And so it's for us to work to get the kids back to, if this is going to be a gang, then it needs to be a gang moving from point A to point B. You cannot be in here and 5 years from now you're still at the same place. What that growth?
No growth,
you know, and if they're not allowing you to grow, and then there's a community group here that is allowing you to grow, then you have to make a decision on what do you want to do. You want to be stagnant, you want to grow.
I mean, so I would assume then that what your transitions would be, your efforts, and so my lifetime, our generation will grow old with that.
Right.
We're not going to see that in our generation. So then that brings me to Mr. Ray. How is it that the Lake Eye Transformers are trying to create a new space where we can, you know, fuse this situation?
All right, I've been listening, and I heard Mr. Caetano ask Mr. Dawson that where it started. You have to go way back to where it started to help these kids. One, it's just because of where you live. Sometimes you're a label, and that's key, because this is why you see it boiling over in the schools. This is why you see whenever a kid goes to a certain school and you see certain guys come looking for them. why they come looking for them is because of the recruitment, right? And to say, I got your back, don't worry about nobody. But what I want to say, right? You must be in the neighborhood to heal the neighborhood before you can do anything in the neighborhood. In other words, they say, right, if you want good, your nose must run. Meaning that you can't want to help people and don't take the risk. It's a risk every day in the neighborhood. I mean, Saturday we did a thing back there, but we did a thing knowing that there's a certain block that came also that there will be retaliation at the basketball court, the football field. But you know what? The bigger picture is that if you don't do anything, then the violence continues. So let them pass and see that something is happening positive. And the thing about it is this: whenever these kids go home, actually the parents didn't even want some of them come out because of the tension and stuff. But we work at the tension. What we do at Lake right now, right? We plan and pack to school, drive about 50 kids out of the crowd, about 150 kids, but we can't, a volunteer group, we can't give everybody something, right? But we could. And what we do a lot, that go in at the neighborhood, go meet with them kids, meet with their parents, explain to them that why you don't like that person from out there. You know her? No. But I live there and he live out there and you're supposed to not like him. And that the root of this whole thing, how it started, you know, because I've been around like, and just because the son live the PIV and I live the Ghost, so although his son, you know, into that and wouldn't even want to hit nobody, a good guy, the more they're in the neighborhood, the more their mind become poisoned, recruited. Because if William is a behavior and he give me $2 to school every day, whenever William tell me why I go to certain things, how I want to say no when he practically they feed me every day. So the sad thing, social, the lack of finance, the lack of people who care. You know, because a lot of people want to say, they don't want nothing, but you need to get in there and hear. Because I could see some guys right now from 20 years ago where they change. You know what the police say? When you don't recruit, you say he only not play with them one day. But they say one day they're tired of it too, you know, because they have kids now. So then they try see how they could help the situation. But if you, the police, stereotype me, every time you meet me, you deal with me, anything happen to me. And I really tired of this. Yes, I know say innocent, but again off now and they try and they use LIU.
It's a reality that we experience. Like, I am from Lake Eye, born and raised. I'm proud of my community with all its flaws, right? When you look at that situation, you do have some of the older people who have survived gangs, who have learned that this is not necessarily the way, and so they themselves have kids who they would want to see take a different direction. But if at the end of the day, as you rightfully said, they are being stereotyped and profiled by others in the community, and sometimes it's not just the police officers who are on patrol in the neighborhood. It's the way how we in society still look at them. Yeah, you don't allow them to be able to express themselves as something different than what you know them.
I have a very, I think I have a very, I don't know if it's a silly question, but you mentioned recruiting, you mentioned protecting this community, you mentioned, I even hear Isan saying he's proud of his community and all its parts. What good is recruitment and protecting a community if there's nothing left to protect?
And that's a good question. And that is why we have community leaders and these groups who are taking back the community. We have to take control of our communities and by extension take back our homes.
Right.
As parents, as elders, we have a responsibility to nurture and support these children as well. because a lot of these recruitment can only take place if we leave our children unattended and not being able to give them the necessary support that they need. Because that's all these gangs do, like Brother Footy said, some of you, there's a lot of hungry children in these communities. There's a lot of homeless in these communities. And so these are the social ills that we have to look at, and with groups like these we can identify, and with the support systems that are in place, we need to network with them so that they can offer the level of support for these children. There's a lot of talent. For example, I'm glad when Isani bring that up. We have prominent people that have risen out of these communities, but for some odd reason, some of them are ashamed, they're afraid because of the stigma created, but we are not afraid. I myself grew up in that community. So we have to speak on behalf of those good, law-abiding citizens in this community, not focus on gang members, because at the end of the day, I'm sure that there's people within these communities who are tired of it as well. But you cannot be, if you're not a part of the solution, then you're a part of the problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of people criticize, they speak down on these communities, but they've never been in them before. They don't understand the love. You could walk through Lake any day and you'll not just get randomly shoot down, But that's the stigma that is created around these communities.
That is the energy that is highlighted. And that is one of the things that we have to change. It's so easy for us to give to negative energy.
Right.
You broadcast it everywhere. And one of the things that I like with watching the American news, if tree puppy ban, that is on the news.
We want to highlight good.
Tree puppy ban every day, but that's our big news. And those are the things that we need to put out there. Small little activities within the Port Loyola community. Creating this group, I was made aware that there's a lot of little subgroups that were doing the work behind the scenes, and so we have opened and invited them for us all to be together.
Yeah.
You ask what is there to save? A child is born every day. There's always going to be something to save. Our group doesn't just only focus on the kids. We want to create that community raising a child sense. We want to provide parent lessons, or there's therapy, there's all different type of things. It's not just focus on the kids, because if you want the kids to adhere, then the parents have to buy in, and vice versa. So it's on a big scope.
We're out of time completely, and don't tell me about 3 times, but I want to highlight the back to school summer event.
Let me just say, so the Port AVP Innovators is doing a back to school hair cutting and braiding for the 27th of August.
Yes.
We have 2 different areas where we're going to be doing it. We are asking for donations. Our numbers is on here, mine and the president. While we're also doing that, for our area, we're giving 3 primary school scholarships to our kids. They're asked to write an essay, and we're going to have it vetted, and they're going to be provided with tuition coverage that lessens the strain on the parents, so on and so forth. Our president has her own business, and so she's one of our independent supporters, and we're still looking for other people. But we're welcoming everybody to come out. If you want braids some hair, if you want to donate some braids, if you have a trimming machine, my number is on here. Feel free to reach out. Like our slogan says, working hands for the community, right? So everybody is welcome.
Well, thank you all so much for coming in. I think that this is a continuous conversation. I appreciate the work that you all are doing in your respected communities, and we hope to see you next time for some better news.
Yes.
And with that, we are going to take another break. But before we get into that, Phoenix Boutique's Look of the Week. Let's check it out.
Welcome to the Phoenix Boutique. Here's our Look of the Week. We have our Meraki white and orange clay earrings, our cider deep orange jumpsuit, Zara white strapped heels, and this look is completed with a Tommy Hilfiger sling bag.